I do not care for horses. I only tell you this so that you can feel the weight of my recommendation. This is a powerful book that intertwines human history with the fate of the horse. It's also a book about Sullivan's father, and the tenderness with which these two themes are interwoven is what makes this book so compelling. But how does he do it? What does the life of a man have to do with the history of horseflesh? And how does he make a man who is frankly terrified of horses read every page and then sing its praises? The book begins with an introduction to Sullivan's father towards the end of his life. A full 20 pages long, it ends with his father saying that of all the experience he's had as a sports writer, seeing Secretariat win the Kentucky Derby on the way to completing the Triple Crown was his most memorable. The Triple Crown is a feat only achieved 13 times in the long history of American horse racing, so it's a notable achievement. But Sullivan is confused. His father had seen Michael Jordan at North Carolina, he'd covered Muhammad Ali. That his father should choose this horse race as his fondest moment sticks with Sullivan, and he begins a characteristic deep dive into the history of horseflesh. What he finds are tales of horses mistaken for gods, status symbols that can be raced only by gentlemen, and aristocratic officers ordering outdated cavalry charges against modern armour. No matter what story he tells, it's clear there's something about the horse in the eyes of humanity, something compelling about Equus in full flight that inspires awe and sometimes irrationality. As he unrolls what he's discovered about the subject of horses and horse racing, Sullivan is careful to always pair these discoveries with human stories. And these stories function as kindling that keeps our interest alight as he tunnels deeper and deeper into the history of horse racing. But by the end of the book, it becomes clear that our newfound knowledge of this history is itself working as a fuel for something else. Though his focus throughout the book is on the intricate history of horse breeding and racing, he overlaps his discoveries with autobiographical accounts of his life and the life of his father. That's what I find so compelling about Sullivan. He has a gift for weaving together narratives that seem barely connected until they begin to echo one another and finally serve as mirrors. In the case of Blood Horses, Sullivan is taking steps in his father's shoes, trying to build up within himself through deep research the kind of understanding his father would have had about this subject. But by sharing his research and finding with us, he invites us to join him in the mourning and remembrance of his father. The way that Sullivan intersperses stories about his father has the feel to me of someone circling their grief. He even writes himself in the middle of the book about how totally inappropriate grief seemed besides any memory of the man himself. Perhaps that's the reason Sullivan starts on this path. Perhaps mourning doesn't seem to him the right way to remember his father. Instead, he focuses on his actions, his obsessions, and his most valued memories. Sullivan never overtly says that he's trying to retread his father's steps, but there's a clear connection throughout the book between his father and horses to the point where the two are practically inseparable. Ever since his father mentioned Secretariat, that seems to have surprised and bothered Sullivan, that perhaps in the last conversation he had face to face with his father, he wasn't able to understand the thing he valued most in his long career. And so, if Sullivan thinks about horses, he thinks about his father. Likewise, when he tells stories about his father, horses find their way into the scene as well. And Sullivan starts to match his own stories with those of his father. Early in the book, Sullivan reads a report his father wrote in an embedded gonzo style about the Kentucky Derby. Later on in the book, Sullivan does exactly the same thing, reporting from his own horse race in clear homage to his father. Considering his desire to follow in his father's footsteps, it makes sense then that Sullivan's research eventually takes him into the heart of people looking to raise and race the next Triple Crown winner, and he attaches himself to them. When he tells the story of the failure Of the first horse he follows, he's surprised to find himself lowering the binoculars with tears in his eyes. It's a sign to the reader that he's doing more than chasing a winner. He's chasing a connection with his father, wanting to experience the same things, to feel close to him one final time. There's a great interview with Sullivan and his editor where they talk about the way he inserts pivot points into his writing. Changes in direction that are small enough that the readers always felt like they were reading the same story, while in fact Sullivan was shifting the formal terrain under them. And that gets to the heart of what's great about this book. Using extracts from other texts regularly throughout this book, Sullivan builds a complicated pastiche of references which in turn echo and are mirrored in the story he's telling about his father. And as the book goes on, they build upon a greater set of themes, namely legacy, bloodlines, the weight of what's come before and once in a generation figures. Furthermore, as Sullivan tells his story, subtly moving the ground under our feet, adding to our emotional load with tiny incremental notes and comments, he makes it possible for us to see the mirrors being held up for us to contemplate. This whole adventure begins with Secretariat, a horse Sullivan describes as not the greatest horse, nor the greatest runner, not even the greatest athlete in the 20th century, but the greatest creature. I can feel his warmth towards his father in that description. I can feel the admiration for a singular man directed through consideration of a singular horse. As readers, throughout the book, we're asked to consider the meeting of dams and sires that brought Secretariat into being, and it's not a coincidence that Sullivan also takes time to describe how his family came to live in Louisville. There are 3 clips of Secretariat winning the Triple Crown saved on Sullivan's computer. He returns to them several times in the book, and the final time he does so, towards the end of the book, he watches them and asks himself the same question he always does. Why did Secretariat run as he did? Pulling away with no urging from the jockey, with no threat of pain, he continues to run even though the race is won. It's a question he's not had an answer to until this moment. He ran that way, I know, because he could, and we cannot. One does not, if one is beauty, have to know what beauty is. It's with this answer in his heart that Sullivan finally tells the reader about how his father died. Then, invoking Proust, he tells the story of the moment he came to accept his father was gone, over a year after he'd been buried. There's a sense of unlocking in this moment, that in knowing the answer to the question of why Secretariat raced the way he did, he now knows the answers to why his father lived the way he did. It's a freeing revelation, and what follows is Sullivan's final tribute to his father, beautiful and heartfelt. In his final act of mirroring, Sullivan takes us with him to witness another attempt at a Triple Crown. And it's a brilliant final scene where he brings the smells, sights and sounds of the track to his readers. In a moment of sublime writing that echoes the pages that have come before, Sullivan channels his father's love and understanding of sporting effort, and his father's legacy shines through him. With the final few lines of the book, Sullivan calls back across everything that comes before, and then wonderfully, brazenly, with the kind of flair you'd expect from this sports writer's son, he shows us his reflection, overlapping perfectly with that of his father. Thanks for watching the video. If you made it this far, consider liking and subscribing for more of the same. If you'd like to read Blood Horses, you can find a link to it in the description. And if you have a book you think I should cover, leave a comment below. Thanks again, and see you next time.